the secularist might speak of as the paranormal, let us believe. Let us believe. Sister Ingram, you're concerned about the losing of your sight. You're not able to see me clearly.
Rant reading: A Mass Murderer. Jim Jones. James Warren Jones, May 13, 1931 to November 18, 1978, was an American preacher, political activist, and mass murderer. He led the People's Temple, a new religious movement between 1955 and 1978, in what he called revolutionary suicide. Jones and the members of his inner circle orchestrated a mass murder, suicide, in his remote jungle commune at Jonestown, Guyana, on November 18, 1978. Jones and the events which occurred at Jonestown have had a defining influence on society's perception of cults. As a child, Jones developed an affinity for Pentecostalism and a desire to preach. He was ordained as a Christian minister in the Independent Assemblies of God, attracted his first group of followers by participating in the Pentecostal Latter Rain movement and the Healing Revival during the 1950s. Jones's initial popularity arose from his joint campaign appearances with movement's prominent leaders, William Branham and Joseph Matson Bowes, and their endorsement of his ministry. Jones founded the organization that would become the People's Temple in Indianapolis in 1955. In 1956, Jones began to be influenced by Father Divine in the Peace Mission movement. Jones distinguished himself through civil rights activism, founding the temple as a fully integrated congregation and promoting socialism. In 1964, Jones joined and was ordained a minister by the Disciples of Christ. His attraction to the disciples was largely due to the autonomy of intolerance they granted differing views within their denomination. In 1965, Jones moved the temple to California. Excuse me. The group established its headquarters in San Francisco, where he became heavily involved in political and charitable activity throughout the 1970s. Jones developed connections with prominent California politicians and was appointed as chairman of the San Francisco Housing Authority Commission in 1975. Beginning in the late 1960s, reports of abuse began to surface as Jones became increasingly vocal in his rejection of traditional Christianity and began promoting a form of communism he called apocalyptic socialism, making claims of his own divinity. Jones became progressively more controlling of his followers in People's Temple, which at its peak had over 3,000 members. Jones's followers engaged in a communal lifestyle, in which many turned over all their income and property to Jones and to the People's Temple, who directed all aspects of community life. Following a period of negative media publicity and reports of abuse at People's Temple, Jones ordered the construction of the Jonestown commune in Guyana in 1974 and convinced or compelled many of his followers to live there with him. Jones claimed that he was constructing a socialist paradise free from the oppression of the United States government. By 1978, reports surfaced of human rights abuses and accusations that people were being held in Jonestown against their will. U.S. Representative Leo Ryan led a delegation to the commune in November of that year to investigate these reports. While boarding a return flight with some former temple members who wished to leave, Ryan and 4 others were murdered by gunmen from Jonestown. Jones then ordered a mass murder-suicide that claimed the lives of 909 commune members, 304 of them children. Almost all of the members died by drinking Flavor Aid laced with cyanide. Early life. James Warren Jones was born on May 13, 1931 in the rural community of Crete, Indiana, to James Thurman Jones and Lynette Putman. Jones' father was a disabled World War I veteran who suffered from severe breathing difficulties due to injuries which he sustained in a chemical weapons attack. His father's illnesses led to financial difficulties. In 1934, the Jones family was evicted from their home for failure to make mortgage payments. Their relatives purchased a shack for them to live in at the nearby town of Lynn. The new home where Jones grew up lacked plumbing and electricity. In Lynn, the family attempted to earn an income through farming, but again met with failure when Jones's father's health further deteriorated. The family often lacked adequate food and relied on financial support from their extended family. They sometimes resorted to foraging in the nearby forests and fields to supplement their diet. According to multiple Jones biographers, his mother had no natural maternal instincts, and as a result, she frequently neglected her son. When Jones started to attend school, his extended family threatened to cut off their financial assistance unless his mother got a job, forcing her to work outside her home. Meanwhile, Jones's father was hospitalized multiple times due to his illness. As a result, Jones's parents were frequently absent during his childhood. Jones was left to be cared for by neighbors and relatives. Early religious and political views. Myrtle Kennedy, the wife of the Nazarene Church pastor, developed a special attachment to Jones. She gave Jones a Bible and encouraged him to study it, teaching him to follow the holiness code of the Nazarene Church. As Jones grew older, he attended services at most of the churches in Lynn, often going to multiple churches each week, and he was baptized in several of them. Jones developed a desire to become a preacher as a child, and he began to practice preaching in private. His mother claimed that she was disturbed when she called him to entertain the pastor of the local apocalyptic Pentecostal church, and she unsuccessfully attempted to prevent him from attending the church's services. Although they had sympathy for Jones because of his poor circumstances, his neighbors reported that he was an unusual child who was obsessed with religion and death. One Jones biographer suggested that he developed his unusual interests because he found it difficult to make friends. Although his strange religious practices stood out to most of his neighbors, they reported that he misbehaved in more serious ways. He frequently stole candy from merchants in the town. His mother was required to pay for these thefts. Jones regularly used offensive profanity, commonly greeting his friends and neighbors by saying, "Good morning, you son of a bitch," or "Hello, you dirty bastard." Jones developed an intense interest in religion and social doctrines. He became a ferocious reader who studied Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Karl Marx, Mao Zedong, and Mahatma Gandhi. He spent hours in the community library and he brought books home so he could read them in the evenings. Although he studied different political systems, Jones did not espouse any radical political views in his youth. Commenting on his childhood, Jones stated, "I was ready to kill by the end of the third grade. I was so aggressive and hostile. I was ready to kill. Nobody gave me love, any understanding. In those days, a parent was supposed to go with the child to school functions. There was some kind of school performance, and everybody's parent was there but mine. I'm standing there alone. Always was alone." Tim Ritterman, a biographer of Jones, wrote that Jones's attraction to religion was strongly influenced by his desire for a family. Education and marriage. In high school, Jones continued to stand out from his peers. He almost always carried his Bible with him. His religious views alienated other young people. He frequently confronted them for drinking beer, smoking, and dancing. While he was attending a baseball game in Richmond, Indiana, Jones was bothered by the treatment of an African American who attended the game. The events at the baseball game brought discrimination against African Americans to Jones's attention, and he influenced his strong aversion to racism. Jones's parents separated in 1945, and they eventually divorced. Jones moved to Richmond, Indiana with his mother, where he graduated from Richmond High School in December of 1948. Jones and his mother lost the financial support of their relatives following the divorce. To support himself, Jones began working as an orderly at Richmond's Reed Hospital in 1946. Jones was well regarded by the senior management, but staff members later recalled that Jones exhibited disturbing behavior towards some patients and co-workers. Jones began dating a nurse in training named Marceline Baldwin while he was working at Reed Hospital. Jones moved to Bloomington, Indiana in November of 1948, where he attended the Indiana University Bloomington with the intention of becoming a doctor, but changed his mind shortly thereafter. During his time at the university, Jones was impressed by a speech which Eleanor Roosevelt delivered out about the plight of African Americans and began to espouse support for communism and other radical political views for the first time. Jones and Marceline Baldwin continued their relationship while he attended college, and the couple married on June 12, 1949. Their first home was in Bloomington, where Marcelin worked in a nearby hospital while Jones attended college. Marcelin was a Methodist, and she and Jones immediately fell into arguments about church. Jones's strong opposition to the Methodist Church racial segregation practices was an early strain on their marriage. Jones insisted on attending Bloomington's Full Gospel Tabernacle, but eventually compromised and began attending a local Methodist church on most Sunday mornings. Despite attending churches every week, Jones privately pressed his wife to accept atheism. After attending Indiana University for 2 years, the couple relocated to Indianapolis in 1951. Jones took night classes at Butler University to continue his education, finally earning a degree in secondary education in 1961. In 1951, the 20-year-old Jones began attending gatherings of Community Party USA in Indianapolis. Jones and his family faced harassment from government authorities for their affiliation with the Communist Party during 1952. In one event, Jones's mother was harassed by FBI agents in front of her co-workers because she had attended a communist meeting with her son. Jones became frustrated with the persecution of communists in the U.S. Reflecting back on his participation in the Communist Party, Jones said that he asked himself, "How can I demonstrate my Marxism?" The thought was, infiltrate the church. People's Temple. Beginnings in Indianapolis. In early 1952, Jones announced to his wife and her family that he would become a Methodist minister, believing the church was ready to put real socialism into practice. Jones was surprised when the Methodist district superintendent helped him get a start in the church, even though he knew Jones to be a communist. In the summer of 1952, Jones was hired as a student pastor to the children at the Summer of Southside Methodist Church, where he launched a project to create a playground that would be open to the children of all races. Jones continued to visit and speak at Pentecostal churches while serving as Methodist student pastor. In early 1954, Jones was dismissed from his position in the Methodist Church, ostensibly for stealing church funds, though he later claimed he left the church because its leaders forbade him from integrating blacks into his congregation. Around this time in 1953, Jones visited a Pentecostal Latter-Rain convention in Columbus, Indiana, where a woman prophesied that Jones was a prophet with a great ministry. Jones was surprised by the endorsement, but gladly accepted the call to preach and rose to the podium to deliver a message to the crowd. Pentecostalism was in the midst of the healing revival and latter-rain movements during the 1950s. Believing that the racially integrated and rapidly growing latter-rain movement offered him a greater opportunity to become a preacher, Jones successfully convinced his wife to leave the Methodist Church and join the Pentecostals. In 1953, Jones began attending and preaching at the Laurel Street Tabernacle in Indianapolis, a Pentecostal Assemblies of God church. Jones held healing revivals there until 1955 and began to travel and speak in other churches in the latter-rain movement. He was a guest speaker at a 1953 convention in Detroit. The Assemblies of God were strong to oppose the latter-rain movement. In 1955, they assigned a new pastor to the Laurel Street Tabernacle who enforced their denominational ban on healing revivals. This led Jones to leave and establish Wings of Healing, a new church that would later be renamed People's Temple. Jones' new church attracted only 20 members who had come with him from the Laurel Street Tabernacle and was not able to financially support his vision. Jones saw a need for publicity and began seeking a way to popularize his ministry and recruit members. Latter-rain movement. Jones began to closely associate with the Independent Assemblies of God, an international group of churches which embraced the latter-rain movement. The IAOG had fewer requirements for ordaining ministers, and they were also accepting of divine healing practices. In June 1955, Jones held his first joint meetings with William Branham, a healing evangelist and Pentecostal leader in the global healing revival. In 1956, Jones was ordained as an IAOG minister by Joseph Matson Boyes, a leader in the latter-rain movement in the IAOG. Jones quickly rose to prominence in the group and organized and hosted a healing convention to take place June 11th through the 15th in 1956 in Annapolis Cattle Tabernacle. Needing a well-known figure to draw crowds, he arranged to share the pulpit again with Branham. Branham was known to tell attendees that their name address and why they came for prayer before pronouncing them healed. Jones was intrigued by Branham's methods and began performing the same feats. Jones and Branham's meetings were very successful and attracted an audience of 11,000 at their first joint campaign. At the convention, Branham issued a prophetic endorsement of Jones and his ministry, saying that God used the convention to send forth a new great ministry. Many attendees believed Jones's performance indicated that he possessed a supernatural gift. And coupled with Branham's endorsement, it led to rapid growth of People's Temple. Jones was particularly effective at recruitment among the African American attendees at the conventions. According to a news report, regular attendance at People's Temple swelled at 1,000 thanks to the publicity that Branham provided to Jones and People's Temple. Following the convention, Jones renamed his church the People's Temple Christian Church Full Gospel to associate it with Full Gospel Pentecostalism. The name was later shortened to the People's Temple. Jones participated in a series of multi-state revival campaigns with Branham in the second half of the 1950s. Jones claimed to be a follower and promoter of Branham's message. During the period, People's Temple hosted a second International Pentecostal Convention in 1957, which was again headlined by Branham. Through the conventions with the support of Branham and Matson Boys, Jones secured connections throughout the Latter Rain movement. Jones adopted one of the Latter Rain's key doctrines, which he continued to promote for the rest of his life: the Manifestated Son of God. While William Branham and the Latter Rain movement promoted the belief that individuals could become manifestations of God with supernatural gifts and superhuman abilities, they believed that such a manifestation signaled the second coming of Christ, and that the people endowed with these special gifts would usher in a millennial age of heaven on earth. Jones was fascinated with the idea and adapted it to promote his own utopian ideas, and eventually the idea that he himself, a manifestation of God. By the late 1960s, Jones came to teach he was a manifestation of Christ the Revolution. Branham was a major influence on Jones, who subsequently adopted elements of Branham's methods, doctrines, and style. Like Branham, Jones would later claim to be a return of Elijah the prophet, the voice of God, a manifestation of Christ, and promote the belief that the end of the world was imminent. Jones learned that some of his most successful recruitment tactics from Branham. Jones eventually separated from the Latter Rain movement following a bitter disagreement with Branham, in which Jones prophesied Branham's death. Their disagreement was possibly related to Branham's racial teachings, or Branham's increasingly vocal opposition to communism. Peace mission movement. Through the Latter Rain movement, Jones became aware of Father Divine, an African-American spiritual leader of the International Peace Mission movement, who was often degraded by the Pentecostal ministers for his claims to divinity. In 1956, Jones made his first visit to investigate Father Divine's peace mission in Philadelphia. Jones was careful to explain that his visit to the peace mission was so he could give an authentic, unbiased, and objective statement about his activities to fellow Pentecostal ministers. Divine served as another important influence on the development of Jones's ministry. While publicly disavowing many of his father's Divine's teachings, Jones actually began to promote Divine's teachings on communal living and gradually implemented many of the outreach practices he witnessed at the Peace Mission, including setting up a soup kitchen, providing free groceries and clothing to people in need. Jones made a second visit to Father Divine in 1958 to learn more about his practices. Jones bragged to his congregation that he would like to be the successor of Father Divine, and made many comparisons between their two ministries. Jones began progressively implementing the disciplinary practices he learned from Father Divine, which increasingly took control over the lives of the members of the People's Temple. Disciples of Christ. As Jones gradually separated from Pentecostal and the Latter Rain movement, he sought an organization that would open to all of his beliefs. In 1960, People's Temple joined the Disciple of Christ denomination, which headquarters was nearby in Indianapolis. Archie Igins assured Jones that the organization would tolerate his political beliefs, and Jones was finally ordained by Disciples of Christ in 1964. Jones was ordained as a disciples minister at the time when the requirements for ordination varied greatly, and disciple membership was open to any church. In both 1974 and 1977, the disciples' leadership received allegations of abuse at People's Temple. They conducted investigations at the time, but they found no evidence of wrongdoing. Disciples of Christ found People's Temple to be an exemplary Christian ministry overcoming human differences and dedicated to human services. People's Temple contributed $1.1 million, $4,697,803 in today's dollars, to the denomination between 1966 and 1977. Jones and People's Temple remained part of the disciples until the Jonestown Massacre. Racial integration. In 1960, Indianapolis Mayor Charles Boswell appointed Jones director of the local Human Rights Commission. Jones ignored Boswell's advice to give a low profile. However, he used this position to secure new outlets for his views on local radio and television programs. The mayor and other commissioners asked him to curtail his public actions, but he refused. Jones was wildly cheered at a meeting of the NAACP and the Urban League when he encouraged his audience to be more militant, capping his speech with, "Let my people go." During his time as commission director, Jones helped to racially integrate churches, restaurants, the telephone company, the Indianapolis Police Department, a theater, and an amusement park, and the Indiana University Health Methodist Hospital. When swastikas were painted on the home of two black families, Jones walked through the neighborhood, comforted the local black community, and counseled white families not to move. Jones set up sting operations in order to catch restaurants which refused to serve black customers, and wrote to American Nazi Party leaders and passed their responses to the media. In 1961, Jones suffered a collapse and was hospitalized. The hospital accidentally placed Jones in its black ward, and he refused to be moved. He began to make the beds and empty the bedpans of black patients. Political pressures, which resulted from Jones's actions, caused hospital officials to desegregate the wards. In Indiana, Jones was criticized for his integrationist views. People's Temple became a target of white supremacists. Among several incidents, a swastika was placed in the temple, a stick of dynamite was left in the temple coal pile, and a dead cat was thrown at Jones's house after a threatening phone call. Nevertheless, the publicity which was generated by Jones's activity attracted a larger congregation. By the end of 1961, Indianapolis was a far more racially integrated city, and Jim Jones was almost entirely responsible. Rainbow family. Jones and his wife adopted several non-white children. Jones referred to his household as a rainbow family and stated, "Integration is a more personal thing with me now. It's a question of my son's future." He also portrayed the temple as a rainbow family. In 1954, the Joneses adopted their first child, Agnes, who was part Native American. In 1959, they adopted 3 Korean American children named Lou, Stephanie, and Suzanne, and encouraged temple members to adopt orphans from war-ravaged Korea. Stephanie Jones died at age 5 in a car accident in May 1959. In June 1959, Jones and his wife had their only biological child, naming him Stephen Gandhi. In 1961, they became the first white couple in Indiana to adopt a black child, naming him Jim Jones Jr. or James W. Jones Jr. They adopted a white son originally named Timothy Glenn Tupper, shortened to Tim, whose birth mother was a member of the temple. Jones' father, Jim John Chemo, with temple member Karen Layton, relocated People's Temple. In 1961, Jones warned his congregation that he had received visions of a nuclear attack that would devastate Indianapolis. His wife confided to her friends that he was becoming increasingly paranoid and fearful. Like other fellow followers of William Branham, who moved to South America during the 1960s, Jones may have been influenced by Branham's 1961 prophecy concerning the destruction of the United States in a nuclear war. Jones began to look for a way to escape the destruction he believed was imminent. In January 1962, he read an Esquire magazine article that purported South America to be the safest place to reside to escape any impending nuclear war. Jones decided to travel to South America to scout for a site to relocate People's Temple. Jones made a stop in Georgetown, Guyana, on his way to Brazil. Jones held revival meetings in Guyana, which was an English-speaking British colony. Continuing to Brazil, Jones' family rented a modest 3-bedroom home in Belo Horizonte. Jones studied the local economy and receptiveness of racial minorities to his message, but found language to be a barrier. Careful not to portray himself as a communist, he spoke of a populistic, communal lifestyle rather than Marxism. The family moved to Rio de Janeiro in mid-1963, where they worked with the poor in the favelas. Unable to find a location he deemed suitable for People's Temple, Jones became plagued by guilt for abandoning his civil rights and struggle in Indiana. During the year of his absence, regular attendance at People's Temple declined to less than 100. Jones demanded that People's Temple send all its revenue to him in South America to support his efforts, and the church went into debt to support his mission. In late 1963, Archie I. James sent word that the temple was about to collapse and threatened to resign if Jones did not soon return. Jones reluctantly returned to Indiana. Jones arrived in December 1963 to find People's Temple bitterly divided. Financial issues and low attendance forced Jones to sell the People's Temple Church building and relocate to a smaller building nearby. To raise money, Jones briefly returned to the revival circuit, traveling and holding healing campaigns with the latter-rain groups, possibly to distract People's Temple members from the issues facing their group. He told his Indiana congregation that the world would be engulfed by nuclear war on July 15, 1967, leading to a new socialist Eden on earth, and that the temple must move to Northern California for safety. During 1964, Jones made multiple trips to California to find a suitable location to relocate. In July 1965, Jones and his followers began moving to their new location in Redwood Valley, California, near the city of Ukiah. Russell Weinberg, People's Temple assistant pastor, strongly resisted Jones's efforts to move the congregation and warned members that Jones was abandoning Christianity. Weinberg took over leadership of the Indianapolis church when Jones departed. About 140 of Jones's most loyal followers made the move to California, while the rest remained behind with Weinberg. In California, Jones took a job as a history and government teacher in an adult education school in Ukiah. Jones used his position to recruit for People's Temple, teaching his students the benefits of Marxism and lecturing on religion. Jones planted loyal members of People's Temple in the classes to help with the recruitment. Jones recruited 50 new members to People's Temple in the first few months. In 1967, Jones's followers coaxed another 75 members of the Indianapolis congregation to move to California. In 1968, the People's Temple's California location was admitted to the Disciple of Christ. Jones began to use the denominational connection to promote People's Temple as part of the 1.5 million member denomination. He played up famous members of Disciples, including Lyndon Johnson and J. Edgar Hoover, and misrepresented the nature of his position in the denomination. By 1969, Jones increased the membership in People's Temple in California to 300. Apocalyptic socialism. Jones developed a theology influenced by the teachings of William Branham and the later Rant movement. Father Divine's divine economic socialism teachings infused with the Jones's personal communist worldview. Jones referred to his views as apocalyptic socialism. Jones concealed the communist aspects of his teachings until the late 1960s, following the relocation of People's Temple to California, where he began to gradually introduce his full beliefs to his followers. Jones taught that those who remained drugged with the opiate of religion had to be brought to enlightenment, which he defined as socialism. Jones asserted that the traditional Christianity had an incorrect view of God. By the early 1970s, Jones began deriding traditional Christianity as flyaway religion, rejecting the Bible as being a tool to oppress women and non-whites. Jones referred to traditional Christianity's view of God as a sky god, who was no God at all. Instead, Jones claimed to be God, and no God beside him. Jones increasingly promoted the idea of his own divinity, going so far as to tell the congregation that I am come as God's socialist. Jones carefully avoided claiming divinity outside of his People's Temple, but he expected to be acknowledged as a godlike among his followers. Former Temple member Hugh Forston Jr. quoted him as saying, "What you need to believe in is what you can see. If you see me as your friend, I'll be your friend. As you see me as your father, I'll be your father. For those of you that don't have a father, if you see me as your savior, I'll be your savior. If you see me as your God, I'll be your God." Further attacking traditional Christianity, Jones authored and circulated a tract entitled "The Letter Killeth," criticizing the King James Bible and dismissing King James as a slave owner and a capitalist who was responsible for the corrupt translation of Scripture. Jones claimed he was sent to share the true meaning of the gospel, which had been hidden by the corrupt leaders. Jones rejected even the view that required tenets of the Disciples of Christ denomination. Instead of implementing the sacraments as prescribed by the disciples, Jones followed Father Divine's Holy Communion practices. Jones created his own baptismal formula, baptizing his converts in the holy name of socialism. Explaining the nature of sin, Jones stated, "If you're born in capitalist America, racist America, fascist America, then you're born in sin. But if you're born in socialism, you're not born in sin." Drawing on a prophecy of the book of Revelation, he taught that American capitalism culture was irredeemable Babylon. Jones frequently warned his followers of an imminent apocalyptic nuclear race war. He claimed that Nazi fascists and white supremacists would put people of color into concentration camps. Jones said he was a messiah sent to save people. He taught his followers the only way to escape the supposed imminent catastrophe was to accept his teachings, and that after the apocalypse was over, they would emerge to establish a perfect communist society. Publicly, Jones took care to always couch his socialist views in religious terms such as apostolic social justice, living the acts of the apostles, was his euphemism for living a communal lifestyle. While in the United States, Jones feared the public discovering the full extent of his communist views, which he worried would cost him the support of political leaders and risk People's Temple being ejected from the disciples of Christ. Jones feared losing the church's tax-exempt status and having to report his financial dealings to the Internal Revenue Service. Historians are divided over whether Jones actually believed his own teachings or was just using them to manipulate people. Jeff Gwynne said, "It is impossible to know whether Jones gradually came to think he was God's earthly vessel, or whether he came to that convenient conclusion to enhance his authority over his followers." In a 1976 interview, Jones claimed to be an antagonistic or an atheist. Marcelin admitted in a 1977 New York Times interview that Jones was trying to promote Marxism in the U.S. by mobilizing people through religion. She said Jones called the Bible a paper idol that he wanted to destroy. Jones taught his followers that the ends justify the means and authorized them to achieve his vision by any means necessary. Outsiders would later point to this aspect of Jones's teachings to allay that he did not genuinely believe in his own teachings, but was morally bankrupt and was only manipulating religion and other elements of society to only achieve his own selfish ends. Early reports of abuse. Jones began using illicit drugs after moving to California, which further heightened his paranoia. He increasingly used to fear, control, and manipulate his followers. Jones frequently warned his followers that there was an enemy seeking to destroy them. The identity of that enemy changed over time, from the Ku Klux Klan to Nazis to redneck vigilantes and finally the American government. He frequently prophesied that fires, car accidents, and death or injury would come upon anyone unfaithful to him and his teachings. He constantly pressed his followers to be aggressive in promoting and fulfilling his beliefs. Jones established a planning commission made up of his lieutenants to direct the People's Temple communal lifestyle. Jones, through the planning commission, began controlling all aspects of the lives of his followers. Members who joined People's Temple turned over all of their assets to the church in exchange for free room and board. Members who worked outside of the temple turned over their income to be used for the benefit of the community. Jones directed groups of his followers to work on various projects for additional income and set up an agricultural operation in Redwood Valley to grow food. Large community outreach projects were organized, and temple members were bused to perform work and community service across the region. The first known cases of serious abuse in People's Temple arose in California, as the Planning Commission carried out discipline against members who were not fulfilling Jones's vision or following the rules. Jones's control over the members of People's Temple extended to their sex lives, who could be married. Some members were coerced to get abortions. Jones began to require sexual favors from the wives of some members of the church, and sexually assaulted several male members of his organization. Members who rebelled against Jones's control were punished with reduced food rations, harsher work schedules, public ridicule and humiliations, and sometimes with physical violence. As the temple's membership grew, Jones created an armed security group to ensure order among his followers and to guarantee his own personal safety. Focus on San Francisco. By the end of 1969, People's Temple was growing rapidly. Jones' message of economic socialism and racial equality, along with the integrated nature of People's Temple, or it proved attractive, especially to students and racial minorities. By 1970, the temple opened branches in several cities, including San Fernando, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, as Jones began shifting his focus to major cities across California because of limited expansion opportunities in Ukiah. He eventually moved the temple's headquarters to San Francisco, which was a major center for radical protest movements. By 1973, People's Temple reached 2,570 members, with 36,000 subscribers to its fundraising newsletter. Jones grew the temple by purposely targeting other churches. In 1970, Jones and 150 of his followers took a trip to San Francisco Missionary Baptist Church. Jones held a faith-healing revival meeting wherein he impressed the crowd by claiming to heal a man of cancer. His followers later admitted to helping him stage the healing. At the end of the event, he began attacking and condemning Baptist teachings and encouraging the members to abandon their church and join him. The event was successful, and Jones recruited about 200 new members for People's Temple. In a less successful attempt in 1971, Jones and a large number of his followers visited the tomb and shrine erected for Father Divine shortly after his death. Jones confronted Divine's wife and claimed to be the reincarnation of Father Divine. At a banquet that evening, Jones's followers seized control of the event, and Jones addressed Divine's followers again, claiming that he was Father Divine's successor. Divine's wife rose up and accused Jones of being the devil in disguise and demanded he leave. Jones managed to recruit only 12 followers through the event. Jones became active in San Francisco politics and was able to gain contact with prominent local and state politicians. Thanks to their growing numbers, Jones and People's Temple played an instrumental role in George Moscone's election as mayor in 1975. Moscone subsequently appointed Jones as the chairman of the San Francisco Housing Authority Commission. Jones hosted local political figures at his San Francisco apartment for discussions. In September of 1976, Assemblyman Willie Brown served as the master of ceremonies at a large testimonial dinner for Jones. Attended by Governor Jerry Brown, Lieutenant Governor Merv Demoli. At that dinner, Willie Brown touted Jones as what you should see every day when you look in the mirror, and said he was a combination of Martin Luther King Jr., Angela Davis, Albert Einstein, and Mayo. Harvey Milk spoke to audiences during the political rallies held at the temple, and he wrote to Jones after one such visit, Rev. Jim, "It may take me a day to come back down from that high that I reached today. I found something dear today. I found a sense of being that makes up for all the hours and energy placed in the fight. I found what you wanted me to find. I shall be back, for I can never leave." Through his connections with California politicians, Jones was able to establish contacts with key national political figures. Jones and Moscone met privately with vice presidential candidate Walter Mondale on his campaign plane days before the 1976 election, leading Mondale to publicly praise the temple. First Lady Rosalind Carter met with Jones on multiple occasions, corresponding with him about Cuba, and spoke with him at the grand opening of the San Francisco headquarters, where he received louder applause than she did. Jones forged alliances with key columnists and others at the San Francisco Chronicle and other press outlets that gave Jones favorable press during his early years in California. Jonestown. Publicity problems. Jones began to receive negative press beginning in October 1971. When reporters covered one of Jones's divine healing services during a visit to his old church in Indianapolis, the news reporter led to an investigation by the Indiana State Psychology Board into Jones's healing practices in 1972. A doctor involved in the investigation accused Jones of quackery and challenged Jones to give tissue samples of the material he claimed fell off people when they were healed of cancer. The investigation caused alarm within the temple. Jones had been performing faith-healing miracles since his joint campaigns with William Branham. On several occasions, his healings were revealed as nothing but a hoax. In one incident, Jones drugged temple member Irene Mason, and while she was unconscious, a cast was put on her arm. When she regained consciousness, she was told she had fallen and broken her arm and taken to the hospital. In a subsequent healing service, Jones removed her cast off in front of the congregation and told them she was healed. In other instances, Jones had someone from his inner circle enter the prayer line for healing of cancer. After being healed, the person would pretend to cough up their tumor, which was actually a chicken gizzard. Jones also pretended to have special revelations about individuals which revealed supposed hidden details of their lives. Jones had co-workers who called at the potential recruiters' homes and asked details and questions of cover during an unrelated examination. This provided Jones with inside information that would make him seem clairvoyant and being in a possession of superhuman powers. And Sevenson. Jones was fearful that his methods would be exposed at the investigation. In response, Jones announced he was terminating his ministry in Indiana because it was too far from California for him to attend, and downplayed his healing claims to the authorities. The issue only escalated, however, and Lester Kinsolving ran a series of articles targeting Jones and People's Temple in the San Francisco Examiner in September 1972. The stories reported on Jones' claims of divinity and exposed purported miracles as a hoax. In 1973, Rose Case, a former follower of Jones, began working with the group in Ukiah to investigate People's Temple. They uncovered a staged healing, the abuse treatment of a woman in the church, and evidence that Jones assaulted a male member of his congregation. Reports of Case's activity reached Jones, who became increasingly paranoid that the authorities were after him. Case reported his findings to the local police, but they took no action. Shortly after 8 members of the People's Temple made accusations of abuse against the Planning Commission and People's Temple staff members, they accused members of Planning Commission of being homosexuals and questioned their true commitment to socialism before leaving the People's Temple. Jones became convinced he was losing control and needed to relocate People's Temple to escape the mounting threats and allegations. On December 13, 1973, Jones was arrested and charged with lewd conduct for allegedly masturbating in the presence of a male undercover LAPD vice officer in a movie theater restroom near Los Angeles MacArthur Park. On December 20th of 1973, the charge against Jones was dismissed, though the details of the dismissal are not clear. The court file was sealed, and the judge ordered that the records of the arrest be destroyed. Formation. In the fall of 1973, Jones and the Planning Commission devised a plan to escape from the United States in the event of a government raid, and they began to develop a longer-term plan to relocate People's Temple. The group decided on Guyana as a favorable location, citing its recent revolution, socialist government, and the favorable reaction Jones received when he traveled there in 1963. In October, the group voted unanimously to set up an agricultural commune in Guyana. In December, Jones and I. James traveled to Guyana to find a suitable location. In a newspaper interview, Jones indicated that he would rather settle his commune in a communist country like China or the Soviet Union. It was saddened about his inability to do so. Jones described Lenin and Stalin as his heroes and saw that the Soviet Union is an ideal society. By the summer of 1974, land and supplies were purchased in Guyana. I. James was put in charge of the project and oversaw the installation of a power generation station, clearance of fields for farming, and the construction of dormitories to prepare for the first settlers. In December of 1974, the first group arrived in Guyana to start operating the commune that would become known as Jonestown. Jones left I. James to oversee Jonestown, while he returned to the United States to continue his effort to combat the negative press. He was largely unsuccessful, and more stories of abuse in People's Temple were leaked to the public. In March 1977, Marshall Kilduff published a story, New West Magazine, exposing abuses at the People's Temple. The article included allegations by temple defectors of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. The article convinced Jones that it was time to permanently relocate to South America, and he began to compel members of People's Temple to make the move with him. Jones promoted the commune as a means to create both socialist paradise and sanctuary from the media scrutiny in San Francisco. Jones purported to establish it as a model communist community, adding that the temple comprised the purest communists there are. Once they arrived in Jonestown, Jones prevented members from leaving the settlement. Jonestown had about 50 settlers at the start of 1977 who were expanding the commune, but it was not ready to handle a large influx of settlers. I. James warned Jones that the facilities could only support 200 people, but Jones believed the need to relocate was urgent and determined to move immediately. In May 1977, Jones and about 600 of his followers arrived in Jonestown. About 400 more followed in the subsequent months. Jones began moving the temple's financial assets overseas and started to sell off property in the United States. The People's Temple had over $10 million for $42,707,000 $1,304, and that's the amount of money in 2020 in assets at the time. Despite the negative press prior to his departure, Jones was still well respected outside of People's Temple for setting up a racially integrated church which helped the disadvantaged 68% of Jonestown residents were black. Mounting pressure and waning political support. Among followers Jones took to Guyana was John Stone. John's birth certificate listed Timothy Stone and Grace Stone as his parents. Jones had a sexual relationship with Grace Stone and claimed he was the biological father of John. Grace Stone left People's Temple in 1976, leaving her child behind. Jones ordered the child to be taken to Guyana in February 1977 to avoid a custody dispute with Grace. After Timothy Stone also left People's Temple in June 1977, Jones kept the child at his own home in Jonestown. In 1977, Jones traveled to Cuba with Carlton Goodlett in order to establish an import-export trading relation with Cuba for a San Francisco Bay Area company that he had founded. While visiting Goulet's business contacts and touring schools and other facilities, Jones was annoyed that President Fidel Castro had not consented to see him. He remarked that Castro had to be living better than the people. While in Cuba, Jones visited the residence of Huey Newton in Havana for an hour, and they talked about Newton's family members who had attended the People's Temple. They also discussed his desire to return to the United States. Jones commented that Newton only missed his luxurious apartment and his favorite bars in Oakland. In the autumn of 1977, Timothy Stone and other Temple defectors formed a concerned relatives group because they had family members in Jonestown who were not being permitted to return to the United States. Stone traveled to Washington, D.C. in January 1978 to visit with State Department officials and members of Congress, and wrote a white paper detailing his grievances against Jones and the Temple and to attempt to recover his son. His efforts aroused the curiosity of California Congressman Leo Ryan, who wrote a letter on Stone's behalf to Guyanese Prime Minister Forbes Burnham. The concerned relatives began a legal battle with the Temple over the custody of Stone's son. Most of Jones's political allies broke ties after his departure, though some did not. Willie Brown spoke out against the Temple's purported enemies at a rally that was attended by Harvey Milk and Assemblyman Art Agnews. Mayor Moscone's office issued a press release saying Jones had broken no laws. On April 11, 1978, the concerned relatives distributed a packet of documents, letters, and affidavits to the People's Temple, members of the press, and members of Congress, which they titled An Accusation of Human Rights Violations by Rev. James Warren Jones. In June 1978, escaped Temple member Deborah Layton provided the group with a further affidavit detailing crimes by the Temple and substandard living conditions in Jonestown. Jones was facing increasing scrutiny in the summer of 1978 when he hired JFK assassination conspiracy theorists Mark Lane and Donald Freed to help make the case of a grand conspiracy against the Temple by U.S. intelligence agencies. Jones told Lane that he wanted to pull an Eldridge Cleaver, referring to a fugitive member of the Black Panthers who was able to return to the U.S. after rebuilding his reputation. Jones attempted to negotiate for his commune to resettle in the Soviet Union. In October 1978, Fyodor Timofeyev, Soviet consul to Guyana, visited Jonestown for 2 days and gave a speech. Jim Jones stated beforehand, "For many years we have let our sympathies be quite publicly known that the United States government was not our mother, but that the Soviet Union was our spiritual motherland." Timofeyev declared Jonestown in harmony of theory with Marx, Engels, Lenin, and the practical implementation of some fundamental features of this theory, and personally thanked Jim Jones. White Knights. Jones's paranoia and drug usage increased in Jonestown as he became fearful of a government raid on the commune. Concerned the community would not be able to resist an attack, he began holding drills to test their readiness. He called the drills White Knights. Jones would call, "Alert, alert, alert," over the community loudspeaker to call the community together in the central pavilion. Armed guards with guns and crossbows surrounded the pavilion. The community members would remain at the pavilion throughout the drill, in which Jones told them that the community had been surrounded by agents who were about to destroy them. Jones led them in prayers, chanting, and singing to ward off the impending attack. Sometimes he would have his guards hide in the forest and shoot their firearms to simulate an attack. Jones' terrified followers were only told they were participating in a drill when the event was over. One drill in September 1977 lasted for 6 days. The drills served to keep the members of Jonestown fearful of venturing outside of the commune. Following 2 visits by the United States Embassy personnel to check on the situation at Jonestown and an IRS investigation in early 1978, Jones increasingly convinced that the attack he feared was imminent. In one 1978 White Night drill, Jones told his followers he was going to distribute poison for everyone to drink in an act of suicide. A batch of fruit punch was served to everyone in the pavilion who sat by weeping and waiting for their death. After some time passed, Jones informed his followers that it was only a drill and there was not any poison in their drink. Through the White Nights, Jones convinced his followers that the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, was actively working to destroy their community and conditioned them to accept suicide as a means of escape. The situation at Jonestown was deteriorating in 1978. The community was exhausted and overworked. Most were required to perform manual labor from early morning until evening. Loudspeakers were installed around Jonestown, and sermons were played on a constant loop for the entire community to listen to. Jones began to propagate his belief in what he termed translation. Once his followers settled in Jonestown, claiming that he and his followers would all die and live blissfully together in the afterlife. Meals were meager, and workers were often hungry. After spending all day working, the community gathered each evening at the Central Pavilion to listen to Jones's preach. His sermons generally lasted for several hours. Most of the community was sleep-deprived. The majority of the community members were minors or the elderly, and the fewer people of working age found it difficult to keep up with the workload required to support the community. Healthcare, education, and food rations were all in limited supply, and the situation was worsening. Jones's drug usage was becoming more noticeable. His orders were increasingly erratic. He could sometimes be seen staggering, and his speech was occasionally slurred. He was seen urinating in public, but this was due to prosthetics for a short time towards the end of Jonestown in late October 1978. He found it difficult to walk without assistance around this time, but it was cleared up by Leo Ryan's visit. Religious scholar Mary McCormick, MAGA, argues that Jones's authority among his followers decreased after the exodus to Jonestown because he was with them every day, and he could not hide his drug addiction from rank-and-file members. Murder of Congressman Ryan. In November 1978, Congressman Ryan led a fact-finding mission to Jonestown to investigate allegations of human rights abuses. His delegation included relatives of Temple members, an NBC camera crew, and reporters for several newspapers. The group arrived in the Guyanese capital of Georgetown on November 15th. 2 days later, they traveled by airplane to Port Catacuma, then were transported to Jonestown. Jones hosted a reception for the delegation that evening and at the Central Pavilion in Jonestown, during which Temple member Vernon Gosney passed a note meant for Ryan to NBC reporter Don Harris, requesting assistance for himself and another Temple member, Monica Bagby, in leaving the settlement. Tensions began to rise as the news spread throughout the community that some members were attempting to leave. Ryan's delegation left hurriedly that afternoon of November 18th after Ryan narrowly avoided being stabbed by Temple member Don Sly. Ryan and his delegation managed to take along 15 Temple members who expressed a desire to leave, and Jones made no attempt to prevent their departure at that time. As members of Ryan's delegation boarded 2 planes at the Port Catacuma airstrip, Jonestown's Red Brigade of armed guards arrived and began shooting at them. The gunmen killed Ryan and 4 others near a Guyana Airways Twin Otter aircraft. At the same time, one of the supposed defectors, Larry Layton, drew a weapon and began firing on the members of the party inside the other plane, a Cessna, which included Gosney and Bagby. NBC cameraman Bob Brown was able to capture footage of the first few seconds of the shooting at the Otter just before he himself was killed by the gunman. The 5 killed at the airstrip were Ryan, Harris, Brown, San Francisco Examiner photographer Greg Robinson, and Temple member Patricia Parks. Surviving the attack were future Congresswoman Jackie Spear, Our Rhine staff member, Richard Dwyer, Deputy Chief of Mission from the U.S. Embassy in Georgetown, Bob Flick, and NBC reporter Steve Sung, and NBC sound engineer Tim Ritterman, an Examiner reporter, Ron Jarvis, a Chronicle reporter, Charles Krause, a Washington Post reporter, and several defecting temple members. They escaped into the jungle to avoid being killed. Mass murder-suicide in Jonestown. Later the same day, November 18th, 1978, Jones received the word that his security guards failed to kill all of Ryan's party. Jones concluded that the escapees would soon inform the United States of the attack, and they would send the military to seize Jonestown. Jones called the entire community to the Central Pavilion. He informed the community that Ryan was dead, and it was only a matter of time before military commandos descended on their commune and killed them all. Jones told temple members that the Soviet Union would not give them passage after the airstrip shooting. Jones said, "We can check with Russia to see if they'll take us in immediately. Otherwise, we die." Asking, "You think Russia's going to want us with all this stigma?" With that reasoning, Jones and several members argued that the group should commit revolutionary suicide. Jones recorded the entire death ritual on audio tape. Jones had taken large shipments of cyanide into Jonestown prior to November 1978, having obtained a jeweler's license that would allow him to purchase the compound in bulk to purportedly clean gold. A drink mixture of flavor aid and cyanide was created and handed out to the members of the community to drink. Those who refused to drink were injected with cyanide via syringe. One temple member, Kristen Miller, dissented toward the beginning of the tape. When members wept and showed signs of dissent, Jones counseled, "Stop these heretics. This is not the way for the people who are socialists and communists to die. No way for us to die. We must die with some dignity." Jones can be heard saying, "Don't be afraid to die," adding that death is just stepping over into another plane, and adding that death is a friend. Jones directed that the children be killed first. His wife, Marceline, apparently protested against killing the children. She was forcibly restrained and then joined the other adults in poisoning herself after the children had died. At the end of the tape, Jones concludes, "We didn't commit suicide. We committed an act of revolutionary suicide, protesting the conditions of an inhumane world." 85 members of the community survived the event. Some members slipped into the jungle just as the death ritual began. One man hid in a ditch. One elderly woman hid in the dormitory and slept through the event, awakening to find everyone dead. The Jonestown basketball team was away at a game and survived. Others hid in dormitories or were away from the community on business when the death ritual unfolded. The mass murder-suicide left dead 909 inhabitants of Jonestown, 276 of them children, mostly in and around the Central Pavilion. This resulted in the greatest single loss of American civilian life in a deliberate act until September 11, 2001. Another 4 members residing in Georgetown died. The FBI later recovered the 45-minute audio recording of the mass poisoning in progress. The reporting became known as the death tape. Death and aftermath. Jones's 3 sons, Stefan, Jim Jr., and Tim Jones, were with the People's Temple basketball team in Georgetown at the time of the mass poisoning. During the events at Jonestown, the 3 brothers drove to the U.S. Embassy in Georgetown to alert the authorities. Guyanese soldiers guarding the embassy refused to let them in after hearing about the shootings at the Port Commuter airstrip. Later, the 3 returned to the Temple's headquarters in Georgetown to find the bodies of Sharon Amos and her 3 children, Laine, Krista, and Martin. The Guyanese military arrived in Jonestown to find the dead. The United States military organized an airlift to bring the remains back to the United States to be buried. Jones was found dead on the stage of the Central Pavilion. He was resting on a pillow near his deck chair with a gunshot wound to his head. Jones's body was later moved for examination and embalming The official autopsy conducted by Guyanese coroner Cyril Mutu in December 1978 confirmed Jones's cause of death as suicide. His son Stefan speculated that his father may have directed someone else to shoot him. The autopsy showed high levels of the barbiturate pentobarbital in Jones's body, which may have been lethal to humans who had not developed psychological tolerance. Jones's body was cremated, and his remains were scattered in the Atlantic Ocean. Guyanese soldiers kept the Jones brothers under house arrest for 5 days, interrogating about the deaths in Georgetown. Stefan was accused of involvement in the deaths and placed in Guyanese prison for 3 months. Tim and Johnny Cobb, other members of the Temple basketball team, were taken to Jonestown to identify bodies. After returning to the U.S., Jim Jones Jr. was placed under police surveillance for several months while he lived with his older sister Suzanne, who had previously turned against the Temple. Members of Jones's family, including his wife, 4 children and their spouses, and 5 grandchildren, died in Jonestown. John Victor Stowen died in Jonestown. His body was found just outside of Jones's house. In a signed note found at the time of her death, Marceline directed that Jones's assets to be given to the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The People's Temple secretary had already made arrangements for $7.3 million. That's $29 million today, in Temple funds to be transferred to the Soviet embassy in Guyana. Most of the money was held in foreign bank accounts and was transferred electronically, but $680,000 of it, that's $2,904,097, or $97 today, was held in cash, and 3 couriers were hired to transport the cash to the Soviets. The couriers were arrested before reaching their destination and claimed to have hidden most of the money. Reactions and legacy. The events at Jonestown were immediately subject to extensive media coverage that began known as the Jonestown Massacre. As awareness reached the public, outsiders refused to accept Jones's attempt to blame them for the deaths. Critics and apologists offered a variety of explanations for the events that transpired among Jones's followers. The Soviet Union publicly distanced itself from Jones and what they referred to as his bastardization of the concept of revolutionary suicide. American Christian leaders denounced Jones as a satanic and asserted that he and his teachings were in no way connected to traditional Christianity. In an article entitled On Satan in Jonestown, Billy Graham argued that it would be a mistake to identify Jones and his cult as a Christian. Graham was joined by other prominent Christian leaders in alleging that Jones was demonically possessed. Disciples of Christ responded to the Jonestown deaths with significant changes from ministerial ethics and a new process to remove ministers. The Disciple issued a press release disavowing Jones and reported that the community in Jonestown was not affiliated with their denomination. They subsequently expelled People's Temple from their denomination. In the immediate aftermath, rumors arose that surviving members of People's Temple in San Francisco were organizing hit squads to target large critics and enemies of the church. Law enforcement intervened to protect the media and other figures who were reported to be targeted. People's Temple San Francisco headquarters was besieged by the media, angry protesters, and family members of the dead. I, James, who returned from Jonestown to take leadership in San Francisco earlier in 1978, was left to address the public. At first, he denied that Jones had any connection to the deaths and alleged the events were a plot by enemies of the church. He later came to acknowledge the truth. The supporters of People's Temple, especially the politicians, had a difficult time explaining their connections to Jones following the deaths. After a period of reflection, some admitted that they had been tricked by Jones. President Carter and the First Lady sought to minimize their connections to Jones. San Francisco Mayor George Moscone said he vomited when he heard of the massacre and called the friends and families of many of the victims to apologize and offer his sympathies. Investigations into the Jonestown massacre was conducted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the United States Congress. Although individuals and groups had provided tips to the FBI about People's Temple, no investigation was made before the massacre. The investigation primarily focused on why authorities, especially the United States State Department, were unaware of the abuses in Jonestown. Although People's Temple collapsed shortly after the events of 1978, some individuals continued to follow Jones's teachings during the 1980s. Since the events of the Jonestown massacre, a massive amount of literature and study has been produced on the subject. Numerous documentaries, films, books, poetry, music, and art have covered or been inspired by the events of Jonestown. Jim Jones and the events at Jonestown had a defining influence on society's perception of cults. The widely known expression, drinking the Kool-Aid, developed after the events at Jonestown, although the specific beverage used at the massacre was Flavor Aid.